Welcome to our morning show today from WRCO Radio on a Monday. We have some great things to talk about again this week during Thanksgiving week. We have a program this morning that I think is going to be uplifting for you. We're welcoming in the studio for the first time Philip Hasheider, and he has written a book entitled 6 Minutes in Eternity, and we'll hear his story. Well, first of all, it's good to have another Philip in the studio for a change.
Well, thank you very much, Phil. This is a double pleasure for me, first to be on your show, and also to share the same airspace with another person with the same given name.
Exactly, and one L too. That's not common either.
Thank my parents.
I know, mine too. Well, let's go back a little bit. You grew up sort of in the area of WRC listening area, didn't you?
Yes, I grew up on a farm. My parents had a dairy, pig, diversified farm, like many farmers did back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And I grew up there, and I've worked with animals and cattle all my life. When Mary and I, my wife Mary and I, went on to farm, we did dairy cattle farm, and then we transitioned into beef cattle. And interestingly, those beef cattle became part of what my story is.
Well, for people that don't know, you had an incident, a medical incident, and thus the title of the book, 6 Minutes in Eternity, that you've explained, I know, a lot over the years, but we'd appreciate it if you'd kind of give us a little insight into when the medical incident happened and then what kind of happened from there, Phil.
Okay. It was an early October morning, and I was out walking to check on our beef cattle like I would normally do every morning. And that particular morning, when I walked out, our cattle were all lying down in the pasture. And I got about 300 feet from them, and one of them saw me and jumped up and looked at me and pricked her ears and then took off running fast across the field, got about 900 feet away and stopped, turned around and looked at me again. Well, that caused a little commotion, and the rest of them, we had 28 head out there, the rest of them got up and took a look at me and wondered what it was about, and they all took off running across the field. Now, that had never happened before, and because the morning before I had been able to walk amongst them and, talk to them and pet them and that sort of thing. So
they were tame and they were used to you and everything?
Yes, yes, but that morning was different. Well, I didn't pick up on it. That morning I had an appointment to have our car's tires changed in our local village. And so I went back to the house to change, and I grabbed my gym bag because I had spent about 3 days a week at different times going to our local hospital's fitness and rehab room where they had exercise equipment. It was supervised. And so I got into town early, and I thought, well, I don't need to have my tires changed yet. I could go for a workout. So instead of turning right, I turned left to go to the hospital's center. Well, I went down, I parked, went downstairs, changed my clothes, came back up, said hi to the 5 staff that were in the room, and stretched, exercised, and got ready. And I went over and did 20 arm curls. Well, I stood up, and the strangest thing was I looked at my forearms because they were both tingling, like I had lain on them and they'd fallen asleep. And that was one moment. The next moment, I found myself in a completely different dimension. And I transitioned instantaneously. And I found myself riding on what I describe as some sort of a raft, which is what we could understand here. And I was riding on these waves and floating and bobbing up and down gently, but they weren't water waves. They were energetic waves that were coming towards me. And not only were they coming towards me, they were passing through me. And I thought, well, this is really unusual. At that point, I didn't realize that anything had happened to me back at the hospital center. So as I was watching these waves, I looked up and I saw what I can best describe as a golden, yellow, glowing, pulsing sphere. It would be like if you compacted 10 million suns into it. It was that brilliant. But yet it was close enough that I could actually reach out and touch it and feel the energy coming from it. It was like it was almost like it was asking me to merge with it. And what I was getting from it was a welcoming. It was all love. It was peace. It was gentleness. And I thought, well, this is really, really quite nice. So I happened to look and I saw little sparks come flying out. I mean, think of millions and millions of these little jets coming out from the surface of this golden sphere. It would be like if you had a sparkler and, that kind of a brilliance coming out, each one of these. And I thought, well, that feels like me. I don't know why I felt that, but it did. So I looked to the side just to see, side as we understand direction, because in that dimension, I realized there is no direction. It is. And to the side of me, I saw other, what I would term entities. Now, I didn't speak with any of them. I didn't recognize any of them, but they were all floating on these same waves as I was. And to the side of that, I saw what I can best describe as a multitude of eternal dimensions and universes. And the best way I can describe it to anyone who's curious is that if you take our universe, what we know of it here, and with the distances and the depth and the space and all the planets and everything, and compress it down to a single sheet of paper, and then you suspend it out here in this eternal space. And then right next to it is another one. And next to that is another one. And next to that is another one. And you can keep going in an infinite direction, one way, up, down, sideways, crossways, as we understand how you can look at things. There were all these dimensions in universes. But each one of them had a filament, an energetic filament that went back and attached to this spider web-like matrix that surrounded this golden sphere. And it was pulsing love, welcome, peace, any kind of positive emotion you can consider into each one of these different universes that were around. Well, after thinking or observing that for a little bit, I decided, well, maybe I should see what's behind me, as we understand front and back directions. Because it'd be like going on a road trip and forgetting to take a look at the side roads. So I turned around to look, and what I can say or explain is that I saw infinity. And it was like the emulsion of eternity acted like a magnifying glass, so that the farther I looked, the clearer it became. But it continued forever. I mean, as we can understand, forever, continuing. And at that moment, I realized somehow, I didn't understand how, I had transitioned from this particular universe that we exist in into another dimension that uses no words. Knowledge is instantaneous. It's all present. It's all love. And in that state, I experienced what was there. So, meanwhile, during this whole time I was there were a dozen EMTs and hospital staff furiously working back at the hospital room, trying to get my heart restarted. And after roughly, it was over 6 minutes, according to the doctor's reports, and 2 or 3 electric shocks, they did get my heart restarted. And then I was gone. I was not in that dimension anymore. I assumed what I had done was returned. But it would be, this was about 11 o'clock in the morning, according to the hospital reports. It would be another 8 hours before I would finally recognize that I was back here, and then very fleetingly. And when I was there in the hospital room, roughly 8 hours later, I did look at the clock, because it was on the wall opposite me, and it said 8 o'clock. And I remember saying to somebody, I assume it was a doctor or something, that, well, that can't be 8 o'clock, because I was just here at 11. And the person said, well, it's 8 o'clock at night. And so there's a span of 8 hours that I have no recollection whatsoever. So it was, at that point, I kept quiet because I was really confused. I had been on the longest trip I'd ever taken in 6 minutes, and it would take me a long time to understand what happened, and still longer to explain how I looked at it. So that was the kernel that went into creating the book and my story, because as time went on, I realized this was something that may be useful to someone else, because there were things that I learned, acknowledged, understood in a way that I hadn't before, because I was given the opportunity to look at things with a different lens that the low wattage of my human eyes here could not possibly understand. So that was what I brought back with me, and what I described. There is more to it in the description of in my book, but that's the basics of what happened.
Did you have a sense that I want to go back there then? I mean, when you woke up, did you have a feeling like, I want to go back to that peaceful, easy feeling, so to speak?
Yeah, it was the next day in the hospital when I thought, what in the world am I doing here? I don't care for any of this. Uh-huh. It was such a positive experience. It was so emotionally fulfilling. It was so wonderful is such a small word to say for it. Yeah, I did struggle with that for the first 2 years, and there's times, even now, 9 years later, that, oh man, I'm ready to throw things away and just take off. Mm-hmm. But my wife, Mary, has been the anchor that's held me here, and our son and daughter, and now our grandchildren. Without them, I probably would want to go again, find a way, because it was, not that I don't like this life, but this is small peanuts compared to what that was, or is.
Fascinating story. Now, I'm guessing, Philip, there are some people that probably doubt your story, you probably came across some naysayers, haven't you?
Oh, certainly. And that's their choice. All I've ever done when I speak to a group of people or do a podcast is ask them to keep their hands open. And just, not that you have to believe what I say, but accept what I say and consider it as something beyond what we normally would encounter in our daily life, because we're busy with a lot of things. But I'm absolutely convinced that this is what comes after. What else would there be? I learned several things from this experience, and one of them is that these little jets that I had spoken about exiting from this golden orb?
Yes.
Well, I finally understood what those were. Those are you. Those are me. Those are everyone out listening to this, whether you want to believe it or not, because we all carry the DNA of that energy, which I refer to as the source of all creation, the divine creator, the God energy, if you wish, if you want to put a name to it. It is all knowledge, and we think we know a lot here. But there, in that dimension, everything is knowable. Everything is understood. There's no transmission of wordage, because words don't exist in that dimension. I mean, it's instantaneous transfer of information between one entity and another, and from the God source to whoever is there, or whatever entity is there. So, people have said, can you believe what you think you experienced? And this came up actually in shortly after, when I spoke to a nurses group at the local hospital. The director asked me if I would come and share my experience, and one of the nurses said, "Well, could you have been dreaming this?" And I said, "Well, that's possible, but I don't believe that to be the case for a couple of reasons. How could I possibly bring that kind of information back here if I had not experienced it in the first place?" The idea that we can have access to a higher knowledge is not far-fetched. We can if we want to. Now, I'm not saying we're all going to become psychics and that sort of thing, because that's not in this field. The humans use words and a language that we can comprehend between each other that has a shared meaning. And sometimes there's miscommunication because of that. In that dimension, there is no wordage communication. It's a difficult thing to explain to someone who may be skeptical, but again, it's what I experienced. I also use a metaphor of our brains. Say, for instance, our human brains can access 8 gigabytes of memory, okay? When you have infinite knowledge, all knowledge that one is exposed to, or I was exposed to, and I come back here and say that knowledge is 1 billion terabytes. Coming back here, trying to stuff all that into a brain that doesn't have that capacity would probably crash it. So I do believe I was given only enough information that I could safely handle once I came back here. And the other thing I say to people who are maybe a little skeptical about this is, if I couldn't remember any of that. We all have dreams, okay? And I'm certain everyone listening has had a dream, and the next morning they wake up and they can't remember it. Or they may remember a portion of it, a little snippet here and there, because dreams diffuse and dissolve in our minds and in the atmosphere. But I know this experience for me was true because every time I think back to it, it is exactly the same. And I can review the whole thing that I brought back with me, and it never changes. And when I stop and think about that experience, I get the same welling up inside me of the welcome and the love and the warmth and the acceptance that I felt there, that as soon as I stop thinking about it, that goes away too. But the next time I think about my experience, it comes back. So there's this connection between what was happening in that dimension and what I can actually physically feel, that connection is what tells me it's true.
Parts of your story, backtracking then a little bit, what the cattle, when they were kind of spooked by you that day, how do you explain that?
That is an interesting aspect of this. And I think anyone who has worked with cattle or livestock or even pets, dogs, cats, whatever kind, animals have their own conscious energy. And I have worked with cattle that exhibit things that we would attribute human feelings to. I've seen cattle rub each other like they really liked each other. I've seen cattle want to fight each other. I've seen cattle go off by themselves, want to be alone. So, and not just cattle, but other animals too. So there's an animal consciousness that exists, and I think the literature is out there to support that. Why they were different that morning was something that I asked myself quite a bit, because they had never done it that way, never exhibited that behavior. But I've come to realize, and with the help of Mary and her insights, that they saw something different in me that morning, excuse me, from what they had seen other mornings. I can't tell you what that is because I can't talk to them, but they obviously saw something that they didn't recognize, and either it scared them or they just didn't know what to make of it. So they saw something that may have been anticipatory to what was going to happen to me, and it scared them. That's the best way. That's the best way I can explain that.
And you're floating along in this beautiful place, and back here on this planet or whatever, people are madly working to revive you, and it's crazy. I'm sure you had a chance to talk to the EMTs and the medical staff that were there that day to recount it. I'm sure just that had to be a mad scene as well.
Well, yes, that is true, and it was kickstarted by a doctor who kept saying that I was lucky. Mm-hmm. That I was in the right place at the right time. Well, I went back and I got the permission from each of the EMTs and the hospital staff to sit and talk with them, basically to interview them, to see what their perspective of my actions. I wanted to learn what happened to me while I was basically dead on the floor. I mean, I'd never felt that way before. So, in fact, I didn't even know I had died. It was only until later when I revived and looked back on it that I knew. But when I sat with each one of those EMTs, and I suggest to people, please support your local EMTs, your volunteers. They are your lifeline, whether you need them now or in the future, but at some point you probably will. But their story, each one of them could, and this was 6-8 months later, each one of them could remember exactly what they did during that period of time that they were working on me. They couldn't tell me what the person next to them was doing, but they could explicitly remember their actions, which means that it really stuck in their mind too. So when I had all of these interviews and looking at what had happened, it occurred to me that there was something more than luck in why I was there in that room at that particular point of time with that many people available to work on me, and not 1 hour earlier when I was out in our pasture looking at our cattle where there was nobody else around and nobody would have found me for 6-8 hours if they knew where to look. So there was some reason as to why that happened at that point in time with that much help. And it took me 8 months before I finally got that answer. And it was because of Mary being so prescient that she would keep a notepad by her stand at night, along with something to write with. Well, during the time I left the hospital 4 days later, without any damage to my heart,
Really? I would have thought you would have had to have surgery of some sort.
Well, I had 2 stents put in.
Okay.
There were 2 blockages, which apparently is what kicked my heart's rhythm out.
All right.
And there was no other damage to my heart. But they put me on, a blood pressure medicine, which tended to depress my blood pressure even more. And I was really struggling during the next 5-6 months because I would lose my balance. Mary really wouldn't let me work with equipment without somebody being there to watch. Initially, she wouldn't let me go out into the pasture by myself. So a lot of stuff fell on Mary, and she had a full-time job during all this. But when I collapsed the second time because of the effects of the medicine that I had, it was after that when I came home and I came downstairs for breakfast. Mary was sitting at the other end of the table. I plopped myself down in the chair, which because I was just tired all the time. And she waited until I righted myself a little bit, and she said, "Well, do you want to hear what you said last night?" And I said, "Well, I didn't say anything. I was asleep." She said, No, you said something. You woke up." "Okay, what did I say?" "Well," she said, "you sat up in bed and started mumbling to yourself." And I couldn't understand what that was about. And all of a sudden, you stopped. You started to shake your head back and forth, saying, "No, I don't believe it. No, I don't believe it. No, I don't believe it." And by this time, she said she had been writing it down. So she asked, "Well, what don't you believe?" And she said, "Well, I told her, or said out loud, that I don't believe the reason I came back." And she said, "Well, what was that reason?" And she said, I told her the reason I came back was that I was to be a conduit of hope for those who don't have any and don't feel there is any. And then she paused. And I said, "Yeah, what else?" She shrugged her shoulders. She said, "Nothing. You just laid back down and went to sleep." Now, I don't have any recollection of that either. But fortunately, she had written it down. But then, once she had said that, I understood everything. I understood why I was there in that room with all that help at that particular point in time, and not an hour earlier out in our pasture. Because if I were out in the pasture, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm supposed to do. And apparently that's what I was supposed to do. So that became the genesis of my story. And since it's been out almost a year and a half now, I've had a lot of comments from people who have gotten in contact with me and said that it was useful to them. And it wasn't something that I thought I had ever set out to do. Because of that experience, I've not been given a free pass. I have to navigate this universe just like you do, just like I do. I have to pay my bills. I have to drive on the right side of the road. I have to put up with people I don't particularly care for. So, I have to live in this dimension as well. But that also has given me some insight into why I was here in the first place. I've had I've had over 73 years of experience here now. And I may have a few more, I'm hoping. But at some point, I realized that I had chosen to come into this dimension like we all do. We all have a choice to come here. And as I understand and read more about it, we all are privileged to come here to experience this dimension. But I came here in 1951. What I describe is I got off the energetic superhighway in that other dimension and dropped down on the off-ramp. I came here. I was born of my parents, raised by them, and now I've lived, as I said, 73 years. What I understand now that I didn't really truly understand before is that once my body here uses up its fuel, which it's going to, just like everyone else, because this dimension that we're in, this body is not built to last forever. Our spirit is, our inner essence, our soul, if you want to choose a word for it. That is that spark that came from the divine creation, the source of all creation, and that we carry with us when we come into this dimension and we are born and live here. Now, I've learned that the body is more than the sum of its parts. I mean, when I was standing next to that arm curl machine, I had all the same body parts, arms, legs, heart, that I had when I was lying dead on the floor, except for one thing. That little spark, that internal essence, that the soul, if you will, was what had gone and was existing in this other dimension that I was experiencing. And then when they restarted my heart, I had to leave. And that's where I came back with. So I was able to transfer to the same dimension twice, to go there and to come back. And I know that's true for everyone. Because why wouldn't it be? We all are unique individuals. We all have unique characteristics. But when I leave here again, I'm going to get onto the on-ramp of that energetic superhighway, and I'm going to go to another experience somewhere within that infinite multitude of dimensions that I had witnessed when I was there. And we all will do that in some form.
Interesting. A message of hope. We'll come back and finish up about the book, 6 Minutes in Eternity. Philip Hasheider, our guest on today's morning show. Welcome Welcome back to our morning show from WRCO. Philip Hasheider is here, and we have a fan. Julie said she just finished the book and really enjoyed it. So you got a fan out there, it sounds like.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
But it's just a fascinating story, and really looking at going forward. I guess one of the questions I was going to ask you is, had you not had this incident and somebody else came up with a story like this, would you have believed this? Like 9 years ago, before your incident, would you have believed this, or would you have been open-minded for it?
I'd like to think I would have been open-minded enough to listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
Would I have? I couldn't believe it in the same way I do now. And I'm not suggesting everybody out there have a near-death experience so that they can, have the same feelings. But yeah, it goes beyond the human concept of understanding what lies beyond, because what happens is that fear becomes our companion, and we get afraid of things, and we may not want to look at death because we've heard terrible things about it. Our emotions have a lineage, just like we have a family lineage. So if you allow yourself not to be afraid to look at it face to face, which I did. But again, coming back, would I have felt the same way? I don't know. All I know is what I feel now. And that point in time, when I collapsed onto our hospital's rehab floor, became like a prism, where all of the events of my life prior to that collapse had somehow worked their way into a focal point at that precise moment. I could have had my tires changed, but instead I took the choice to go to the fitness room. Now, I don't know that I would have collapsed at the tire place, but I do know I collapsed where I was in the hospital. So you make choices. We all make choices, and we have to live with those choices. Now, had I collapsed somewhere else or out in the pasture, I would have had to live with that in a completely different way. I wouldn't be able to come back and tell you what I experienced, but because I was given the opportunity to come back, this is what I can explain.
You've been a part of the other people who have come back from near-death experiences. In fact, I think you were just at a conference recently, weren't you? To speak to people there?
Yes. Mary and I spoke at what's called the IANDS conference. It's IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. It's a organization that I think if people are looking for information about near-death experiences, or I wouldn't doubt that there's someone listening who has had something of an experience that they don't quite know what to put a handle on it. There's a near-death experience. There's a spiritually transformative experience. There's an out-of-body experience. There's awakenings, and there's a bunch of other experiences. But the IANDS group is based in Durham, North Carolina, and it is a safe place to go online or contact to find out more information. It's all confidential, except for, their conferences are open to attendees. And Mary and I went to talk about the topic of our panel was the after effects. And this is much Mary's story as it is mine. Because, like I said, she dealt with the chaos of my instantaneous collapse, which she didn't anticipate. And then the aftermath, the hospitalizations, having to deal with insurance issues, having to kind of look out for me afterwards to make sure that I would actually wake up in the morning, or that I wouldn't get myself in the machinery, or that the cattle wouldn't run over me. And she had a full-time job. So she had as much on her plate. Actually, she had more on her plate than I did. And I'm grateful for her to sticking with me. One of the things that we have learned since in the last year and a half is the statistics involved with couples, partners, companions, where one of them has a near-death experience and the other doesn't. Between 65 and 70% of those couples end up in divorce. And it's much higher than the regular. And it really goes back to one had this extraordinary experience that the other observes from the outside looking in. It sees the effect on that person, but doesn't necessarily understand all of the dynamics going on inside that person of what their change in outlook and philosophy or feeling is about life. And so that creates some challenges. I mean, when I got home and Mary would lay down a bill in front of me that how we're going to pay this one, I'd just kind of push it aside thinking, well, what difference does that make? You know? Uh-huh. So I was still in this euphoric stage, and the other person isn't, and the other person can get a little bit frustrated with not getting one's attention focused on the daily living. Like I said, I wasn't given a free pass. I still have to live here and do the things that we would normally do in a daily life. So there's a stress factor that goes into couples who experience this. They experience it in completely different ways, but they still have a common experience. So the conference was about explaining this to a large group of people. And it comes back to this is a group, the IANS group is a good contact for information. And I encourage anyone who has a question to get hold of them. They're more than willing to help.
Have you talked with anybody who had a similar experience when they came back and saw what you saw?
Not before my experience. I mean, this was not even in my wheelhouse that there was a near-death experience, that there was a transformation. After that, I've encountered other people who have had near-death experiences, and now you're seeing more of them publicly available to talk with. I'm willing to talk with anyone. It's not a real problem for me. For some people it was, because they don't necessarily think anybody's going to believe them. And what I can say to those people is that there are people that will listen. And I think it's important that someone who has had some sort of an experience they can't identify as being within their realm of normality to try to get some help. And I'm not saying psychiatric help. I'm just saying somebody who's going to listen and think you're not crazy for having experienced that. I can't say that I had anyone doubt what I've said. I mean, they haven't told me to my face. And there probably are, and that's fine. We all can make our choices, but I do know that even though they may not believe it now, at some point down the road, they will have their own experience. It may not be anything like the experience I had, but once they leave this dimension, they're going to keep on going just like I will, or you will, and that's the hope.
Well, it provides hope, obviously, that when we die, it's just not the end, right?
Well, that's my understanding. This is not the end. This is a journey, and we all come here. Part of our choice to come here is to learn. This is not a school of punishment, although humans try to make it that way. This is a school of learning, and this is a school of experiencing things. And we take this experience with us to where we go next. Now, I think at some point you have learned everything your soul is going to learn, which may take, a couple million infinities, but at some point I think we do, and then we don't come back. And then we become what I consider a guide. And the guides are some people may refer to them as angels, guardians. To me, the guides are a amalgamation of knowledge, and I think they are with us. They don't tell us what to do, but they offer pathways of choice, and we are allowed free will. Once we separated as that little spark from that golden globe, once we left there, we were given free will, so that wherever we go, we make the choices ourselves. There's no one standing up there in the clouds telling us what we should be doing. We are given the free reign of our own choices. And I've not had what they call a life review that I remember, but I think at some point we are going to experience the things choices that we've made, but we aren't condemned for it. I mean, in basics, if somebody's wondering, no, I do not believe there is what we refer to as a hell. I also don't believe that what we refer to as a heaven is there either, because these are not clouds. This dimension was not clouds. There was no sky. There were no stars. It was just a presence of infinite knowledge and love.
You have another book in you?
Not sure. The first book was written at a time when I didn't necessarily have the full information that I have now. I mean, it's come slowly as I am becoming aware of other things. So we'll see, but it is available.
How's the best way to get it?
It's on Amazon.com. And that's the way a lot of marketing books are. If someone does not go on the internet or doesn't want to use Amazon, that's fine. They can contact me at philiphasheiderbooks.com, and I have copies if they're interested. It's philiphasheiderbooks@gmail.com.
Gmail.com. All right. And you are willing and available to speak to groups if they'd like to
hear
your story?
I have, yes. I certainly would. I've spoken at public libraries and at some churches, and so, yeah. I should point out, this is not a religious message. So if you want a conversion, you're not going to get it from me. I just explain what I experienced in a way as some sort of conversion.
Interesting. It's a book of hope. We have Thanksgiving coming up, so you have a lot to be thankful for.
I do. And, well, I think everyone does, but I especially, because given almost another decade, I've now experienced our son and daughter's weddings and 3 grandchildren. So, yeah. And my brothers and sisters are still here. So, yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think you've moved a lot of people with your book and continue to do so. Thanks for coming in today.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I've enjoyed this, Phil, and also meeting another Phil.
Absolutely. Us Phils got to stick together. 6 Minutes in Eternity is the book. Philip Hasheider, a guest on today's morning show.